Hey sewing enthusiasts, welcome back to our channel. Today we're diving deep into the world of scuba fabric. We're also going to be unveiling a super luxurious dupe that we came across for the very trendy, very expensive Spanx Air Essentials fabric. And we're going to be exploring how scuba fabric pairs perfectly with our newest pattern release, the Aurora dress and tunic, among other patterns. So stick around for some smart sewing tips, in-depth information on scuba fabric, and some news about the Aurora. What is scuba fabric? Firstly, scuba fabric is what's called a double knit. Some other typical double knits you'll see are Liverpool and Ponte, but essentially a double knit is just a fabric that has two layers that results in something that's thicker and it's a lot more stable when you're sewing and wearing. So scuba fabric is a type of double knit. For home sewing purposes, scuba is the fashion variety of fabric that most people know as neoprene. So that is the neoprene that's used for wetsuits and scuba diving. So the fashion scuba fabric is a double knit. It is a poly fabric, and poly just means that it's synthetic, it's man-made, and it's usually, scuba fabric is usually a mix of poly with lycra or spandex, and those components give it some stretchiness with like some really great recovery, and among other great qualities. Overall, it usually has a really smooth texture, and the threads that are used have a really fine gauge, I guess. Scuba fabric is typically really springy and stretchy. Some people even call it spongy. Scuba fabric is resistant to wrinkles, which is fantastic. It's not super breathable, but it does have excellent stretch and recovery. And what's great is that you're not going to find that scuba fabric, that garments made up with scuba fabric will shrink a lot after you wash it. So those are all great qualities about scuba fabric. Now, you might be wondering, where does scuba fit into my sewing projects? Like, how could you use scuba inside of your sewing projects? So actually the answer is a lot of places, more than you might expect. So from blazers to dresses to skirts to hoodies, even workout wear has its place with scuba fabric. And especially in recent years, I've kind of noticed a trend that high-end retailers like Spanx or Lululemon or Athleta, they've kind of embraced scuba and blends of scuba because they can create something that has great drape, really nice feel, all of these positive qualities of a thicker, stretchier kind of fabric. And even Walmart and Amazon, if you go on there and search for scuba items, you're going to find lots of pieces of clothing that are made from fashion scuba fabric. So it's kind of like a phenomenon in recent years. So where could you use scuba fabric in sewing? Blazers, dresses, skirts, hoodies, even workout wear. You can use it in a lot of different places. So let me tell you a little bit about my little journey with scuba fabric. So about a year and a half ago, I think it was, I saw the Spanx Air Essentials fabric used in that cute set that they had. It was like a little pullover with a zip and a pair of pants, and they were coordinated. A lot of people wearing them in like creams and whites. They had black, navy. I think they even had like kind of like a crimson color. And it was just like the most beautiful loungewear set I had ever seen. It was gorgeous. And I'm pretty sure that Spanx did some kind of huge scale influencer, stunt or campaign. And they offered these sets to like tons of influencers, and everybody was wearing them, and everybody was genuinely loving them, and they looked fantastic. Everything's so smooth and sleek, and they kept talking about the texture of this being so spongy and just beautiful to wear. And Spanx, if you're listening, it totally worked on me. I really, really wanted it. But when I would go and look at the price tag for that Spanx set, I would see that it was like altogether it was gonna be like $250 for a pullover and a pair of pants. And I just like look at all the fabric that I have and the patterns that I have available to me, and seeing how the pullover they had and the pair of pants that they had with it were like basically exactly what I could make myself. I was just missing the fabric. I just couldn't justify buying it. So I reached out to like 10 fabric companies that we have a relationship with and basically said, here's the composition that the Spanx set has inside of it. Where can I find fabric like this? Can you find me some fabric like this? And lots of them had been kind of conversing with me about this and trying to find this fabric. So I ended up using a really beautiful double sweater knit from StyleMaker. And I love that set, and you can watch my video about that. I'll link it in the description box. But what was so cool was that just about like a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, my friend Kayla over at Surge Fabric Shop, they are a go-to place for me personally. I love searching at Surge. I know I'm going to find a lot of what I want there. Kayla found it. And thank you so much, Kayla, because I have been dying for this fabric. And she said, Tessa, I found this fabric. I think this is what you were looking for. I think it's really similar to that Spanx Air Essentials fabric. Would you like to try some? And I was like, 100% yes, I would love to try some. So I got it in, and I've sewn up a couple things with it, and I am in love. And I've touched the Spanx fabric like in person several times before, and I would say this is the absolute closest that I have ever seen of this type of fabric before. It is a scuba type fabric. It's a double knit, but it has a lot of these like really beautiful qualities. And I'll just go ahead and show you a couple of shots of what this fabric looks like and give you some of the information about it here. So anyway, I want to introduce that Spanx Air Essential look-alike, the dupe. It's sort of like a suede scuba fabric. And it really, to me right now, is like the star of my fabric show. I love it. And of course, there's lots of other types of scuba that have all of the properties that I talked about before. But again, this particular type of scuba style double knit fabric is by far my favorite that I have worked with. All of the patterns that I'm going to mention here and later in the video, they could work with either type of scuba fabric, the one from Surge or any other of your regular scuba fabrics. But I just think that these 4 patterns would work especially well with that special scuba double knit style. What I love about this scuba fabric is that it combines the softness and the drape that we love from modal fabrics with the easy care, the structure, the durability that polyester has. And it has just a touch of spandex with that, so that whatever you sew up, it's going to keep its shape really well. The right side of this fabric feels super soft. It's got a little bit of a texture to it. That's kind of where I feel like it's like a suede feel, sort of like a Cupro jersey knit would have. And then the wrong side of the fabric is really silky and cool. The double knit construction means that just like a double knit, it's thicker, it's beefier, it is going to have more in it than a regular jersey knit fabric would. But what's cool about this is that the fabric is still like very light and breathable. And I think that's because of that modal inside of it. The fabric is great for a variety of garments that we're going to discuss. And especially great for that lounge luxury sort of set. And I think that you're going to get a lot of use out of it if you decide to pick it up. So modal makes up 50% of the composition of this type of scuba fabric, this double knit. And then the 47% left is poly, and then the rest of that is a spandex or some kind of, lycra. Modal is actually made from beech trees, and it's sustainable, it's eco-friendly, and it's a really nice natural source for fabric, other than, compared with regular poly types of fabric, which I think are made from petroleum. So this particular fabric is a blend of modal and poly. And so it gives you the best of both worlds when it comes to a double knit or a scuba fabric. There's more breathability, there's more drape, there's really more of like a pleasant texture to it. It's again, wrinkle resistant, it's still spongy, it's still stretchy. It just is super luxurious feeling. So let's talk about 4 Love Notions patterns that I think would pair perfectly with either that fabric dupe or just regular old scuba fabric. So first of all, Aurora, tunic, and dress. I'm so happy to tell you that this pattern just released, and I think it is the ideal pattern for scuba, especially this dreamy scuba fabric that I was searching for. So I actually went ahead and sewed mine up. I put on hold the scuba lounge set, and I just dove right in with the Aurora. So with a pattern like this, you are not gonna wanna mess around with a thin, flimsy fabric. For this pattern, you need something substantial that can stand up to those really strong design lines. That inset piece, the bodice lines, the princess seams, they need something that's not gonna be droopy or sloppy. And scuba fabric will absolutely allow for that structure. And it's also gonna give you a look that is totally polished and sleek with lots of comfortable stretch, where it's not gonna get pulled out of shape because the fabric doesn't have great recovery. Scuba fabric is gonna give you that recovery. I also really love that a scuba fabric typically will accommodate a changing body, and this pattern will totally accommodate that. From throughout the month, my body changes quite a lot. And so that, moderate negative ease that the pattern has at the bust, it kind of like, the fabric will help nip everything in, but it will also allow for fluctuations. So it's got excellent recovery, and even if it is getting stretched out a little bit more than usual, everything's gonna bounce right back. And I love that. In a little while, in a video that's coming down, I'm gonna give you a review over everything that you need to know about the Aurora tunic and dress pattern. So keep an eye out for that. But just know that right now you can get that pattern for $3 off through its release week, and you can make up something that is like a chic, totally put together outfit with just one piece. I just highly recommend picking that pattern up, especially for a workwear wardrobe, especially if you're looking for something to wear out and about. It will just make a project that is understated, but strong, but interesting, if that makes sense. I'll go ahead and show you the 2 makes that I made with Aurora. One is in that beautiful knit scuba type fabric that Kayla over at Surge sent me. And another one is in a purple Ponte fabric. So both of those are double knits. And again, this pattern is gonna be one that works really well with a double knit. So I highly suggest going that direction when you're working with it. But you can find out more about other fabrics that work well with it and see all of the tester pictures and all of that stuff over in the video that's coming up soon. Another pattern that would work really well with a scuba knit, that's Constellation Pullover. That's the pattern that I think I went to first when I was thinking about that, pulling off that dupe of the Spanx set. The Constellation pattern was just really like the whole reason that I got here. It is perfect for a scuba or scuba blend fabric. Like I said before, it's essentially the same as that Spanx set. The Love Notions version has some of the same style lines. I like that it's got a longer zip, and it's got a hood option. It's got options for finishing at the bottom. It's the perfect spring transitional piece, especially when you pair it with scuba fabric. And it's got all that softness with great recovery. I would absolutely use a thinner non-scuba fabric for just a couple of places on the piece. The hemband, and maybe like the inner collar lining. I wouldn't probably do a double layer of scuba there. But that scuba is the spongy, sleek, strong fabric that's gonna stand up to the weight of those style lines and create something that would be great for workout wear or lounge wear. Now, Metra Blazer is another pattern that would be just a workhorse in anybody's professional or workwear wardrobe. And that Metra Blazer is just completely beloved for that, and it would go great with scuba fabric. People go crazy for those polished details that this pattern has. The princess seams, the welt pockets, that really unique collar construction. And scuba is a great fabric to show off, again, those style lines. And it's super luxurious when you're wearing it. It's, again, that fabric that's substantial and thick, and it would give Metra Blazer it would allow you to wear it throughout the entire year and in all kinds of weather. In fact, some of the very first samples that Metra Blazer was sewn in, it was actually sewn in a suede scuba fabric. And that's really similar to my dream fabric that Kayla found for me. So I highly suggest thinking about the Metra Blazer when you want to sew up some scuba fabric. The fourth pattern that I want to talk about is the resolution bottoms, and I think they would be great in scuba fabric. But when I made my own luxury lounge set, I used the Constellation Pullover like I discussed before, and I paired it with the resolution bottoms in the boot cut yoga pant. What a glorious set that made in a double sweater knit. And now that I have a source for a dupe of that Spanx Air Essentials scuba fabric, I am planning to use, again, those same resolutions as the bottom. They're just perfect for that style. The resolutions have 4 different types of styles that you can do. There's just regular tapered leggings. There's a boot cut yoga pant, straight yoga pant, and joggers. Now, initially you might kind of feel weird about using scuba to pair with a leggings or a bottoms pattern. But I think depending on the stretch and the recovery and the drape of your scuba fabric, I think scuba makes a great option for anything that is workout wear adjacent in general, or for some dressier sorts of bottoms or leggings. Maybe something that could be worn under a tunic, or even if you made your joggers version in scuba, but with a knit ribbing at the openings. In fact, when I was researching this, Lululemon offers several pieces of scuba fabric that are essentially the same thing as the resolutions bottoms joggers. So why not make your own? Let's talk about care and sewing tips for scuba fabric just in general. I highly suggest that number 1, you pre-wash your fabric. It's not so much that I would suggest to pre-wash to eliminate your shrinkage, but because that's not really going to be an issue with scuba fabric because it is not really going to shrink too much for you. But it's to rinse off all of the extra stuff that they put on fabric these days. There's all sorts of dyes and chemicals that can be on any kind of fabric, and I really highly encourage you to pre-wash your fabric in cold water. We use detergent with ours, and we do that every time before we start working with it. In fact, we have kind of a system. Anytime we get some fabric in, we always just go ahead right away and put it in the wash, do all the stuff to get it ready to sew with, and then just stick it in our stash so it's ready. As far as adjustments to your sewing machine, you're going to want to take a careful look at your tension. When you're sewing, you do not want those stitches to be too tight. There is so much squishiness here in the fabric that if your tension is off, the thread is going to sink really far deep down into the fabric, and that'll create a bunch of problems. So in order to prevent maybe any waviness that you're going to have, you're going to want to tone that tension down just a bit. So for my sewing machine, I set my tension to a 3 and sometimes even a 2 at a few different points where there was just more fabric layers. And that just gives everything enough room when you're working with that extra squishy, thicker fabric. Third, consider using ballpoint or stretch needles when you are sewing with this fabric. I typically don't think too much about my needles, but when it comes to this kind of fabric, you do want to have a needle that has, not a super sharp point, and that's because the fabric can snag. So that leads me to my next point. Please be aware that some scuba fabrics can snag a little bit easier than other sorts of more resilient fabric. The threads that are in scuba are really fine and silky. So you really need to take care when you're sewing, and especially when you pin or clip. It's just fabric that is not as resilient as a cotton or a linen. Those all have a rougher texture, and that gives them a little bit more durability when it comes to kind of things scraping over them. So with scuba, be sure not to drag it over any surfaces, even the throat plate of your sewing machine. Be careful that the fabric doesn't catch on your jewelry, for example. A lot of that can cause some snags. So another tip is after you've sewn, and when it comes time to wash, really consider turning your garment inside out, wash it on cold, wash it in a delicate cycle, And I would probably line dry. That's just my opinion. I think things going into the dryer that might be a little bit more delicate when they're wet, they tend to come out a little bit different. So I would definitely line dry. It's not a necessity, but that's how I would do it, just to avoid it going and getting increased exposure to things like jeans or other rough items that could damage or snag the fabric. So just treat it with a little bit more care because it is that luxurious blend of fabric. Another thing I would suggest is to stitch first and then serge. And this is going to help make sure that the fabric is evenly distributed as you sew, and you won't end up with some parts of your sewing kind of like overstretched. And I think you've probably seen before like those super wavy seam lines on certain garments, especially when you're sewing thicker fabric. Like for example, where the hemband is going to go, like that horizontal stitch line is like all wavy. So I would suggest sewing it first with a straight stitch and then serging. And then another reason I would suggest that is because at least when it comes to on my machine, for whatever reason, it's really difficult to get my settings right so that when I stretch those seams apart just a little bit, just like normal wear, that I don't see that line of stitching. So it's kind of tough to calibrate. So doing that preliminary first stitch helps that a little bit. And then I go over it with my serger. Just a note that with this fabric, when you're sewing it, you can absolutely use both pins and clips. I did test both just to make sure it was all gonna work. And the fabric doesn't show any holes. But I would note that clips can leave like a little impression inside of the fabric, and that might last for a little while and it might not come out until you wash it. So I made sure to use pins and clips inside of the seam allowance so that I was just going to be sewing over it anyway, and I wasn't leaving impressions on anything that was going to be outward facing. Another thing to note is that you really want to be careful with your iron. Use a moderate temperature because this is synthetic fabric and it's going to melt easier. Especially for the special Spanx dupe fabric, I wasn't going to take any chances with that. That one actually can handle a little bit more heat than a regular Scuba can, just because there's some more natural fibers in it, I think. But when you're pressing Scuba fabric, just be super careful. And I really recommend using a pressing cloth to have over it so you've got just a little bit of a barrier. As you're pressing, if you're pressing like the front bodice area, for example, on the Aurora, you might see like those seam allowances show up on the right side of the garment, because it's all those layers are kind of pressing through. So I would be careful around those spots, and I might not press the seam allowance like together. I might just press it without catching the seam allowance in on one side or the other. So thank you for taking a closer look at Scuba with me. And I think that you'll agree that Scuba has like really come a long way in the sewing world since it appeared in the 70s or so. And it's just, with all these blends and everything, you can use it for so many more things than you might initially think. I am especially thrilled to find such a gorgeous version of it with the look-alike Spanx Air Essential fabric from Surge Fabric Shop. I love it. Especially love it paired with our new Aurora dress and tunic. So take a closer look at both of those options. I've linked everything below. I hope this video has inspired your next sewing project. Let me know, is it gonna include some Scuba eventually? As you're dreaming up your next sewing project, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Love Notions channel, and be sure to share your creations with us on our other social media outlets. Remember that with the Aurora tunic and dress sewing pattern, we have got our hashtag Sew It First LN challenge, and you could win big if you happen to sew your new Aurora up if you tag Love Notions and then you use the hashtag Sew It First LN. Basically, we're just giving a little bit of a prize to those people who tackle those patterns as soon as they come out. So our next video is going to be a pattern overview for Aurora that's kind of unlike anything we've done before. We titled it Aurora, What to Know Before You Sew, which kind of sounds like a regular review, but this time we're trying out a little bit of like a different vibe. We have a bunch of like little informative segments. My favorite segment in this type of review video has been called Wardrobe Department. And in that segment of the video for the review, we're gonna decide together which characters in pop culture or history would have this garment in their closet. So think which characters in pop culture history would have Aurora in their closet. There's also one segment that's about the MVP of the pattern and the red, green, and beige flags of the pattern with some interesting facts and some signs about whether or not it's for you. I hope that you watch that next video and that you have some fun with Aurora too. So I'll see you in the next video, and until next time, happy sewing.